My pleasure. And I do share that concern with doing it safely. But as you well know, we have other committees that are meeting, subcommittees that are meeting, the Senate is meeting, and I believe we can as well in a safe manner. And I thank you very much for your willingness to work to that end. And I appreciate that greatly. As far as the hearing today, with the help of the American people and the cooperation of the American people, we as a nation successfully flattened the curve as it relates to COVID-19, and our hospital systems were indeed not overwhelmed. Our collective resolve to flatten the curve in that regard has nonetheless paid a tremendous cost to our economy, to people's lives, to people's livelihoods. And now we are in the process of moving towards reopening and restarting our economic system and prosperity for people. And during these trying times, as you mentioned, the federal government has remained open particularly for essential services. They've been there to respond to the crisis. They've been there to serve the American people. And many of these federal employees have been on the front line during the coronavirus itself. They've been working each day to try to ensure that our country can continue to run. There have been other federal employees who have been working from home, working remotely from different places. They've been balancing their responsibilities to the taxpayers with their responsibilities to serve the American people. And from the very beginning of this crisis, the Trump administration has moved quickly to protect federal employees from the coronavirus. For example, since February, OMB and the Office of Personnel Management have issued no less than 20 guidance documents to agencies pertaining to ways that they can manage the workforce during these unprecedented times. At every point, the Trump administration instructed agencies to provide employees with maximum flexibility, and that's extremely important. Maximum flexibility so that they can care for their families while at the same time continuing to work. In April, the administration issued guidelines for agencies to reopen federal facilities. Those guidelines were consistent with the same reopening guidelines for the private sector. My Democrat colleagues, many of them have criticized the Trump administration for rushing to reopen federal facilities. But the Trump administration developed their guidelines with the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. They also used the expertise of many within the private sector, many of whom have remained open during the entire economic shutdown. It's important for us to understand that the administration stresses that each agency must carefully consider their specific mission and the workforce when they are planning to reopen and go beyond the remote setup. Absolutely, there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all as it relates to a reopening plan. And so while developing a plan to reopen, the agencies have been given guidelines and certain things to consider. Among those are things like the location of the facilities. We all know that at least 85% of federal employees work outside of Washington, D.C. And so agencies need to consider the state and the location, the conditions that they have in their particular area when it comes to reopening plans. Also, they need to continue to use telework when necessary and when appropriate. That is a viable option. They also need to consider options for high-risk federal employees. They need to provide sanitation and hygiene supplies and requirements in their offices. And they also need to perhaps modify any office space which does not allow for social distancing. These are just some examples that the administration has given agencies. And I think these are very common sense type guidelines that have been put up there. And so we need to look at all of these, and we need to consider some of the various ways that we can transition now our federal workforce. But it's time for the federal government and Congress, for that matter, to lead by example. We have got to reopen, and we've got to do so in a manner that is safe. The American people need to come back to work, and I believe now is the time for Congress and the federal government to lead by example